Hey, it's Steve again. This is part two, same day. This is like March 5th. Um, and I was just talking about, oh, by the way, my channel's called Still Working It Out. And the reason is obviously I'm an old man and I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. So I'm just still working it out. Been married 3 times, all those things. Somebody that can't figure it out, hasn't figured it out yet. But mitochondria, I should I should probably look that up and say it right. But anyway, the mitochondria in your body is the little generators, like the powerhouses in your body. Like a generator, you put gasoline in it or diesel in it, and you start up the engine and it turns and it makes electricity. That's mitochondria. The damn word I just said, mitochondrial function in your body. If you're a sluggish person, if you're tired all the time and stuff like that, it's entirely possible that you have a weak mito. I just need to have the word printed in front of me. I haven't said it many times in my life. Mitochondrial system, where each one of those things it's kind of like having a low white blood cell count or a low red blood cell count or something like that, where you're in your body, these little generators aren't doing a good job. They're not keeping up. They maybe did a lot better when you were younger, but now they're not doing as well. I take a medication. I've taken a medication for 30 years now called Effexor. That's the original name of it, Effexor, Exor. And it's venlafaxine is its proper name. And because it's no longer under patent, so nobody sells it that way, so I buy the generic version. I get prescribed the generic version. And what Effexor does is it's prescribed for people as an antidepressant. But really, it was designed originally, I believe, for the VA, for people with serious PTSD from like Vietnam and stuff. And I started taking it when I was reading about it, that one of my brothers was put on it. And it had a tremendous effect on him. And he was my older brother, and he had what's called a CNS accident in puberty. And when he came out of puberty, this is something we found out decades later, of course, but when he came out of puberty, his body no longer produced serotonin. And so he became a highly addictive person, addictive personality, where he started doing drugs. He drank anything he could do that would externally activate his dopamine, as opposed to having dopamine given to you. As a child, you clean your room, your mom says, "Oh, great job," and you feel that pleasure. That's your natural dopamine that comes from inside you. You have a thought that comes through and that converts to this pleasure feeling. And that's something that's, from caveman times, it trains you, like sex is good, go find a mate. That's, the more babies you make, the more likely you are to have your genes go far into the future. And that's why I exist, because somebody's dopamine level worked properly at one point. And most people's dopamine works properly. My brother's didn't anymore. And so he found external pleasure wherever he could. And that's why he was so hardcore into drugs and dope and just any old thing he wanted to do. 9 times out of 10, it was illegal or wrong. And so anyway, I heard about that, and then I had read about it myself. And I was my second marriage. My wife had really severe bipolar disorder, and before it was called bipolar, it was called manic depressive syndrome or something like that. But anyway, she would highs, and she was great. She was like an angel, and she was fun to be around and stuff. But boy, I'll tell you, the other direction was something. If I had ever seen it when we first met, I would have never learned her first name. She was cute. That was neat. She had this really amazing personality, and that sank it for me. And like a moron, because my ADHD, I decided on her, and asked her to marry me before I'd even known her 2 months. Brilliant. The first time and she was medicated, and I didn't know that either at the time. She took something called Zoloft, and most people have heard of Zoloft because it's a highly prescribed medication. And it's typically for people that suffer from bipolar disorder. And some people's bipolar disorder is lighter than other people's. There's different varying degrees of, some people's ADHD is much worse than others. I have no idea where I rank on the scale. No idea. But I know one thing, I sure have frustrated a lot of people since birth. But my wife's bipolar disorder was severe, and I didn't realize, anything about that. But she took Zoloft, and sometime after we got married, I should have known. I should have known at the first day, really, which is our wedding. Her dad was a nice guy, and he really pulled out the stops, making a beautiful wedding. She was his oldest daughter, and all that. They went traditional and paid for a big wedding and all this kind of stuff. And but when it was over, and it was almost like he was handing over the keys to the new house. It was no new house involved, but I'm just saying the keys to his daughter. She's been my responsibility up until now. Now she's your responsibility, kind of thing. He didn't say that. He said, now she's your problem. And he had never once acted like he had a problem with her. Not once. He's a very loving father, Very loving family, in fact. And I'm like, excuse me? What was that? I'm in a tuxedo, And I'm like, I'm sorry, what was that? If somebody has said that to you and kind of like the way he said it, and it was almost like being able to read his mind, like he was really on purpose sending this shit to me. And all of a sudden it was like somebody threw a glass of cold water in my face. And I'm like, what? What was it? What? Oh, fuck, man. And I didn't, I didn't hear that. I heard it. It must have been notated in the back of my head, but I went and had a good honeymoon. It was fun. They paid for that too, She was a lot of fun until she wasn't, which would have been probably 3 or 4 months after I met her. I saw the next person, Satan's daughter, let's call her. And that poor girl, I don't know if that had been something she had been dealing with her whole life or just since puberty. And I suspect it was in puberty, your body's going through all kinds of chemical changes, and your body's trying to figure out. This human being started out, it was a blank slate, but they live in a really dangerous place, or they live in a really peaceful place. They live in a really competitive place, or they really live in a really, a luxurious place, whatever. And so we're trying to decide what they need chemical wise, out of their own enzymes and hormones and things like that. And so during my brother's transformation during puberty, his system fucked up and decided to deny him something that's ultra important. Her system, if I'm correct, did something weird too. And that's every person that's ever had bipolar, and I'm really sorry for, pointing this out or whatever the case may be, but it's a really, serious disorder. And for some people, it's not as bad as others. My father was, we always thought he was manic depressive. Nobody ever told us that, but he was the same way. He would have these highs and he's happy and he's, playing the guitar and all this kind of shit. And then other times he would be, and he used to call it the dark dogs, the dogs of hell or something like that were on him. And he would just get really quiet, and you could tell he hated his life. And at that age, I only knew him until I was 19, and then he passed. But I had grown up with the stories of his early childhood, and there was lots of reasons. And he didn't like to talk about that either. He never told a fucking thing about that. It was other people. And not even my mom, people that knew him for a long time and stuff, people he had kind of opened up to, other adults. And I just assumed those moods came from that part of his life. It made sense. Why would somebody act that way? Well, maybe it was these things I had heard, And it turns out, I think it was chemical. My mother was an ADHD person. Okay, that's why I got the chatterbox thing. That's why I do half the things I do. And then I think I got a little bit of this mood swing thing from my dad. Mine was at a level, where that I get some depression, but the anxiety is worse than the depression. It affects me more in some ways, Like my dad, for depression, I just get quiet, which is really weird, I'm sure, for people to be around me, because on my mom's side gave me the anxiety and the never-ending chatterbox thing. And then when a person like me gets depressed, they're like, oh shit, what's going on, And the anxiety, though, is not as good. When I get anxiety, in my younger years, I was too dangerous for that. I spent my hobby was fighting and stuff. When I was a kid in school, I did have a habit of fighting. And I ended up saying, okay, well, you can't fight and hurt people because that's wrong. But what if I'm protecting people? And so I ended up finding all the bullies from in grade school, the smallest years in grade school, and I would find the people that were bullying the little kids or the awkward kids, the kids that weren't quite right, and I would just clean their clocks on a regular basis, and I felt good about it. But I also got to beat the shit out of people who were bad. I talked myself into that. And then I didn't just stay that way as a kid. I turned my life into that. The military was a great way to have that, because you're all about having to go to combat. So I made sure and chose a job that would, not infantry, because I definitely was thinking more than that. And but it was in a communications unit, but that was tactical. And I had plans for the next level, and the next level was going to be something else. But I only ended up doing 4 years because life got in the way, and then I got fucked, by the system. And, when I say the system, I mean timing and all that kind of stuff. Bill Clinton just took over office, which I voted for him. I voted for George Bush before him, because I admired him and stuff like that. And I didn't regret my vote with George Bush, But when Bill Clinton came around, I was watching his stride, his behavior and stuff and what he was saying. And I'm like, I buy that, I was still a young guy. So I voted for Bill Clinton. And then Bill Clinton, one of his things he had to do was get the country back solvent again, get rid of this giant deficit that we had built when we were playing chess with Russia, with Soviet Union. We won, and it literally did take the spending, the arms race that we went into to get them to fuck themselves up. Because they had bad ideas. Not all of them. Gorbachev, in my opinion, was as close to being a good, perfect. He's like up there with Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, kind of a weak president, but a superb human being. And, a lot of what made him superb is his religion. But he lived his religion, What I don't like is hypocrisy. If people my dad lived his religion, I admired that. My mom tried, and she did mostly. But she was more like what I consider a normal person, And not everybody has that kind of discipline, to live their religion, to live in the way that they think Jesus would have lived, or whoever it is that their religion worships. And what forced me out of religion was two things. Once I realized it was fake. Once I realized it was a sham. Shit, I couldn't follow that, because first off, it's a sham, and it means they're all worshiping the sun or something, Nah. The sun's just a big ball of gas. It's not a real thing, It's not. It doesn't think. It's not helping us, It might help us, but it doesn't intend to, You can't piss it off. That I know of. So anyway, once I figured out it was fake, I'm fine. I have no problem whatsoever with other people having whatever religion they want, as long as they don't fuck with other people on it. Do no harm to other people. And I kind of believe in the Hippocratic Oath, where that doctors have to say do no harm. They have to take an oath that they will do no harm, and that they will do their best to relieve suffering. And I'll go with that. That's what Jesus said. If Jesus was a real, actual, historic person, which I think he probably was, according to everything I've read, he probably followed a path a lot like that. I don't think Jesus was perfect. I don't think he was. I don't think he was any more the Son of God than I am. Okay, God is such a weird word to me too, because it's three letters, a tiny little word, always capitalized, but a tiny little word for what it actually means. We couldn't express in a word what something like God, an actual God, really is. I'm not against religion. I'm not against, there's something out there or whatever. But I know there's no heaven, and I know there's no hell. I know there's no actual God in the sense of the guy with the white beard up in heaven looking down upon us and stuff, and he'll help us if we pray, and he won't if we don't, and that if we don't pray to him, that he'll let this devil loose on us, which is named Lucifer. No, I don't believe any of that bullshit. That's all made up. It's a big story. It's been added to over 2,000 years by so many people. It's not even funny. It's entirely possible that Jesus Christ, the person we call that, he was never called Jesus in his lifetime. It was Yahshua. But that is neither here nor there. The name was adopted eventually, when other languages got involved. It's entirely possible that Jesus was at least at minimum, he was at least as influential as a person like David Koresh. Okay. David Koresh, in modern times, the Waco thing, was an extremely influential person because he just had this thing. He believed in himself. He might have been crazy, but he 100% believed in his own shit. Jesus at least had that going for him. And he might have even been psychic. When I say psychic, there's a lot of shit that we don't know, still to this day with our technology level, that we just don't know. We haven't been able to prove it. But there is 100% proved, in my opinion, the ability for people to be psychic, remote viewing, and knowing the future, being able to see things in the past there was no way that they could possibly know. AI, you can't get that kind of information from AI and stuff like that. It's a logic information thing only. It will only ever look at proven technology and proven data and stuff and put those together, and then it'll weigh those things in a statistical way, and it'll still come up with kind of like Carl Sagan believed in. Carl Sagan was a brilliant man, but Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and who was also a student of Carl Sagan's, would never say that they believe in psychic stuff. They would never say that they believe in aliens and things like that, simply because the scientific process says if it can't be proven and then reproven by other people too, it doesn't exist. You can't say it exists if it can't be reproven, So there's a fine line between being a human being who can think of terms of in abstract, in terms of factual things, along with hypotheses that are built from probabilities in your mind that might even come from just other people's beliefs, that can go the wrong direction. You got to be really careful to make sure that you don't believe in anything, kind of a thing, because there's a lot of bullshit out there. But I started this conversation by talking about Methylene Blue. This guy is not a doctor, not a PhD, but his name's Grant Hughes. Brilliant, absolute brilliant psychology expert. I'm not going to call him a psychologist even, because I don't think he has tons and tons and tons of education, but he doesn't have a PhD, in psychology or whatever. He's not a therapist necessarily. His psychology expertise came from a whole nother goal, and that was to basically interrogate and interview people to find out what the truth was. People that didn't want to spill the beans, and he got them to just puke it all out, whether they wanted to or not, or to find out if somebody is lying. Those kinds of things. He went out from another direction, and the consequence of that is he explored things that traditional psychology almost ignores. So I found out he has a brain disease, and he recently found that out just a few years ago. He was taking a medication to help something, and one of the side effects of this medication was seizures. And turns out he was having like a dozen or more seizures a day for a long time. And all these people around him knew him as this ultra. He's not just what you would think of as a psychologist. He's a gifted, like, level, like a savant without being the idiot part, right? Because he was just that obsessed with it in his younger years, and his mind was able to build. He had a brilliant enough mind that he was able to build on all those discoveries he made, one on the other, consistently through his life, until by the time he was in his 40s, fucking guy was a guru when it came to that shit, and he was being tapped into for some really specific things that psychologists make a ridiculous amount of money to work with, except he wasn't working in that level, in that end of it, I should say. He was working on a different end of it. He was working in the military with it, and he was deployed to conflict areas a lot for his job, which was completely unrelated to that. And during that time, he was around for a whole bunch of explosions, and suffered concussions and things. And I've told people about this, which they have a hard time believing, but I've had 27 concussions that were documented. I used to carry a file around with me. The file eventually got, the paper got filed someplace and then probably destroyed, which, I almost have no childhood pictures of myself, because over time, shit in my life gets destroyed. My dad used to say 3 moves, like when you're moving from house to house, is equal to a complete burn out. Like the house just burnt down to the ground and all your shit went away with it. Well, I've moved a lot more than 3 times. So over time, most of my shit is gone by the wayside. And luckily, though, before I did that, I converted it all to digital, and I used to carry I have a necklace still that I wear, but when I'm not home, of a 1 terabyte flash card, and thumb drive, and it's all that information's on it. Well, I had that on in a situation where I went into I was on a canoe on the Mackenzie River, and I went through a bad section, and out of all the shit I ever did, that was the one time I did some shit that actually destroyed that thing. And the computer I had at the time, I never even thought about it, but I still had that information, no problem. I was going to do something with it, to get it digitized eventually and get it back onto a flash card, wear it on my necklace again. And within months of that getting destroyed in the river, that computer got destroyed. Now all my shits, I can easily find it again, because it's documented in medical records all over the place, but I'd have to put all that together again. Um, but it's not impossible by any means. It's just a bunch of legwork that I'm too lazy for. But anyway, I had 27 concussions, and so I was recently watching this thing where he, spilled the tea about him having this brain disease, where everybody knew him as this big guru, psychology guru, and so they thought that he knew that he was having these seizures, and they assumed that he was talking to somebody about them. The problem is, it's like a joke, like a comedy of errors. Every time he had a seizure, it would be followed by amnesia, and nobody knew it. So he was like roofing himself every time he had one of these seizures, and he would have like a dozen a day. So we went years having several seizures a day. Finally, somebody said, "Hey, you're having seizures," a medical professional, and they took his driver's license. And, then he had to really confront this, like, "Hey, what's this about seizures, and all this kind of stuff." And everybody in his life knew about it, that he spent time with, his wife, everybody. They all assumed he was so high up on the food chain of psychology that it was being dealt with. He was trying to figure it out or something. Nope. Anyway, he started reaching out. I mean, he was like to the point where he was thinking that he was not able to drive anymore, and so it was affecting his work. And he was retired from the Navy by now, and so now he has his own business, as a consultant and stuff, and making good money at it. He's famous. That's why I knew about him. And he was consulting for the military, teaching special operators, how to conduct themselves in interrogations, how to conduct themselves in clandestine operations and stuff like that. And so all that was getting affected. And he was like thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have these so many times that eventually I'm going to forget my kids and all that kind of stuff, And he was almost writing himself off, and he decided something happened, and he decided to pursue it as to find out if there was anything could be done. So he was taking this medication to kind of reduce these, something that was happening in his body. But one of the side effects that fixed one thing created another thing. And so that's where the real seizures came from. It went from a seizure once in a while. He had epilepsy, some kind of epilepsy. And one of the things that happened was that it bumped his seizures to like a dozen a day. And I think it all started from one of his last concussive events. He started taking a medication from that, and it caused seizures. And then fast forward like 10 years to when he figured out that's what he was having, and so he got involved in trying to fix it. An oddball doctor who doesn't follow the rules. Somebody recommended him to him, and started seeing him. And this doctor, he's an MD. He's also a neurologist. He's also a chiropractor, and he has this whole other way of looking at shit. And he looks at not just a specific discipline in medicine, but in a kind of more of holistic stuff, like looking at everything, trying to put the pieces, the clues together, the dots together, And one of the things he told him about was methylene blue. And we went through all the talk about how it was discovered. And just to give you the information, methylene blue is the oldest synthetic chemical still used as a therapeutic medicine for human beings to this day. So it's been around forever. It's been, lots of people have been on methylene blue for 20 years. But now it's being publicized enough to where that's the first time I ever heard of it. And I would have never put two and two together that it was something used in people, and it has some properties that it fixes brain issues that have been previously thought to be unfixable. And nobody wants to do any big studies on it because nobody can patent methylene blue. It's too old, And so, yes, pharmacies do get it from the people that make methylene blue, and they convert it into something that they consider pharmaceutical grade, USP grade. But you can go on Amazon and you can see a zillion methylene blues, None of them are pharmacy grade, even if they say they are. If you can buy it without a prescription, it is not pharmacy grade. And the best pharmacy that I could find that sells it, if you have a prescription, says that 2 out of every 3 batches they get, when they get a batch, they convert it into something that's usable in pharmaceutical grade. They said 2 out of every 3 batches that they get are filled with heavy metals. It cannot be used on people no matter what. So they have to literally sell those 2 batches to companies using it as dye only. Because methylene blue is to be used on people to fix brain problems. Heavy metals would be the exact opposite. If you wanted to fuck somebody's brain up, that's what you'd use. Heavy metals kill mitochondria, you know. And so when this guy started using this methylene blue, he gets it intravenously. He's been having these seizures for years now. They stopped, like abruptly. He can remember everything now. He's remembering everything now. Suddenly he has more energy. All the things they say happen when you start taking methylene blue. Now, some people are talking about taking 100 milligrams to 300 milligrams or whatever. And one of the people that I looked up, he's taking like 4 milligrams twice a day. He's a pharmacist. And he talked about getting too much methylene blue, which is your body can't metabolize it all. So if you get too much methylene blue, you can start overdoing yourself. Say like if you were to, he takes 4 milligrams twice a day. He doesn't have an underlying problem. He wanted to see what it did for him for energy and stuff, and it gave him much more energy without taxing. Like caffeine is a spike in energy, but then it drops you like you're like on a hot rock. So when you drink energy drinks a lot, it'll spike your energy and kind of create a dangerous cardiovascular system problem, but then drop you like a hot rock. And so you can't even spend it. You know, this 5-hour energy is the reason they call it 5 hours, because after 5 hours you start to go, you know. And this methylene blue is different though. You maintain this elevated state of consciousness and stay there. You know, that you take it twice a day because it has a half-life of like 8 hours or something, or 14 hours. And so if you take a small dose twice a day, you're evening yourself out for the whole day. But after several days, you can only metabolize so much. After several days, you're actually building a little bit every time. And so that guy still recommends that you still take a day off. You know, you spend a day with no medication of that type, allow it to metabolize through your system, and then the next, day you go on after that 1 day break, you go back on to 4 to 8 milligrams of pure methylene blue. And so that's what this other guy's doing. And I think his name's Grant Hughes, I believe. Not doctor. He's not a doctor. And so I just made an appointment with a doctor in Baton Rouge toward the end of this month to prescribe methylene blue to me, and then I won't get it at a pharmacy around here or whenever I go through this one particular pharmacy that's like a mail order, but they're the ones that I know of that are the most concerned with making something actually pharmaceutical grade that removes all the byproducts out that people shouldn't have, that will hurt people. And they're the ones that specifically, in some of the research I did, said that 2 out of every 3 batches they get are not usable in human beings because they're filled with lead and mercury and things like that. So I highly recommend starting to research, not even if you've got brain damage, which most of us have made ourselves. I mean, think of all the dope people have done in the past. I never did any dope, but I sure did plenty of drinking in my day. But the 27 concussions I've had, if you've ever had one concussion, you have brain damage. Okay. I've had 27. One of the concussions, I remember not being able to do math easily for a week, and, it never quite came back, so that's brain damage, I had a TIA in my 40s when I first, not long before I found out I had MS. And they did a brain scan and they found that I had had 2 strokes at some point in my youth. In my 20s, I boxed. It was not competing or, getting any trying to, trophies or any of that shit. Just boxed every day in the gym, 4 or 5 days a week. And I got a lot of head injuries, and I got my bell rung many, many times. And if your bell ever gets ring, I'm not saying that's brain damage because that's not a concussion necessarily, but if your bell gets rung, whether you've got knocked out or whether you've kind of, dingy, that's your bell getting rung. And even if it's only temporary, that's brain damage. If you've ever, in my opinion, now this is not the medical community, but if you've ever passed out because you're drunk, that's a whole lot like getting knocked out, okay? But you've done it chemically. If you've done a lot of that in your life, you have damaged your brain. They always talk about what certain things kill brain cells. I think a lot of things kill brain cells. You could breathe the air these days or drink the water and you're getting brain cells killed. Nothing builds brain cells. There isn't a function in the world that builds brain cells until now. Methylene Blue can repair brain matter, which is made up 100% of cholesterol, by the way. There's no mechanism to grow new brain matter until now. That's why they said the brain lesion that I grew is the size of a peanut, according to the X-ray or the MRIs. When I say a peanut, not the little nut, but the whole peanut shell. And that area of my brain does not conduct electricity. So there's this portion of my brain. You think of the pound of the size of a brain, the size of a peanut in my brain in a very specific spot in my frontal lobe that does not conduct electricity, even though there's millions of nerves going through there. Whatever messages are getting set are getting delivered, that kind of thing. And so it has changed my life, not for the better. And it now limits me, which is why I'm having to make so many changes in my life for the last, 6-7 years, whatever. And for the first time, though, I might start taking Methylene Blue and have it fix some of that. This is the first time I've heard from anybody of any kind of credible anything that's possible. So if you know somebody, and I just now heard of this, if you know somebody that may have not heard of this yet and that may be able to benefit from this, do some research, tell people that care about them, somebody needs to try to make this happen for them. If somebody was born with intellectual limitations that could be from brain damage, even at birth, it could help them. At worst, won't do anything for them. There is a specific medical condition that people that have this medical condition, it's a neurological problem, that shouldn't take it. So do the research, find out. I don't remember what it is called, but it's a deficiency of like glucose. I'm a diabetic, so that really caught my ear when I heard that. But that particular deficiency I do not have. So look into it. I don't know how it's been around so long and nobody's ever fucking told me about it. I'm actually kind of furious inside, because when I was at University of Iowa Hospital, there was a team of 12. Some of them were world-class neurologists, neurosurgeons. And then I even sent all my data off to the Mayo Clinic for a second opinion, and they concurred. Nobody ever said anything to me about I've never even heard of Methylene Blue, ever. Not in any context. So pass this along. It's really important. All right. Thanks for you guys' time. This went a little longer than 30 minutes, but hopefully it helps somebody. Hopefully it gets out there. And I hope you guys have a great day, and don't be hard on yourself. Don't talk shit about yourself or to yourself. Don't let it come out of your mouth. Really, it's a big deal. No negative self talk. Start watching that Grant Hughes on YouTube. I think you'll think he's brilliant, like I do. All right, have a good one, everybody, and I love you guys.